Give us a few minutes as usual. We're just going to spend a couple minutes sharing out the link to our live as we get moving. Some group chats, so just bear with us here for a sec. Pop in, give it a little repost. If you're tuning in, share it with your friends because we are going to dive into all things Bitcoin and Rootstock in 2 seconds. All right. Give
We
us a
even
few.
have a ticker in the announcement.
Yeah, well, we're
When I
talking about
looked
Bitcoin
in.
today. Yeah, and Riff, which we'll get into shortly. Ba, 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 ba. Ba, ba, ba. Okay, let me drop it in there. Put it in there. All right. One more place I want to share it. Where's the best place for this? Okay.
All good from my end.
All right. Rock and roll? Should we get started? Okay.
Let's go.
Let's go.
All right. Welcome all, and thanks for coming through. This is Chain Reactions. This is our weekly live stream where we talk to founders, marketers, and all around awesome people from around the crypto space. Really excited today. We have a longtime friend of Myosin and just all around really sharp guy, Ben, on to talk all about Rootstock, scaling Bitcoin, Riff, Bitcoin DeFi, and all the rest. But how are you doing today, Ben?
Good. How are you guys doing?
We're doing good.
Amazing.
We're yeah, it's Thursday, almost Friday, so I'm feeling all right.
Caffeinated and
Yeah.
feeling good.
Yeah, I have the flu, so I got it from my kids. So it's been a long week of one getting sick and then the next and then me. So
Oh no.
yeah, I saw
Busy
you guys in the
season.
team. Yeah,
You don't seem too sick at least on camera, so I think that at least is a plus. Yeah.
that's just all the filters.
AI does a wonderful thing nowadays. But let's
Exactly.
get into it, Ben. We'd love to have the way we love to always start these is we love to learn about the man or the woman behind the story, I guess. So we'd love to kind of hear a bit more about, even pre-crypto, right? Like, what's your story, right? How'd you get into crypto? How'd you get into Bitcoin, obviously, and then how'd you get to Rootstock and where you are today? Let's start there.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting question, and I would say I got into all of the things you just mentioned all in one go. So my background is not crypto at all. So I don't have what you would call a degen or a crypto background. So from New York, born and raised, moved to Europe to start my career. So I was originally a management consultant with Bain. So kind of, boring, corporate, strategic job. I then went into a private equity backed company, WorldPay, the payments company, and I
Yeah.
did go to market against some of their more digital competitors or our digital competitors ahead of a big IPO. Sorry, my daughter has just burst in the door. Did a big IPO, and then I got into fintech startups. So
Mm.
COO, MD, and when you're in an early stage startup, it's whether or not the title is operations or something else, it's all about growing the business, right? So growth is this malleable term, all about just making sure that the business is getting bigger, right? And so I'd been an executive for about 7 or 8 years, and also I had my own advisory firm. Helping companies grow, right? Because I've not that I've broken things down into playbooks, but it's more I was thinking of myself as like a growth physical therapist, right? Where you sort of tell me, where your pain points are, and I kind of help you, you find the ways of solving them. And so one of my clients, longstanding, where I'm a board member, is an executive search fund, like a headhunter that Rootstock had used in the past for their previous CMO and for a few other roles. And there was an interim CGO role that came across, the desk, and I looked at it and I said, well, I had seen crypto to the extent that working in fintechs in 22 and 23, stable coins were beginning, right? You were, yeah, like we were beginning to see how it enabled instant money transfer, and also particularly in the emerging markets. So I was at a company called Chipper Cash, which is kind of like the cash app for Africa. And the crypto based portion of it was huge because there was so much desire to circumvent, I think, the tough currencies situations in Nigeria, Uganda, and stuff like that. So I said, well, look, I don't know that much about crypto, but I know about growth and I know about fintech. So let me give it a go, right? And so my experience with Bitcoin and crypto and Rootstock all happened at the same time, where I joined and I had to have a crash course into what is all this, how does this work, what are the mechanisms, whatever. So it took me about 6 to 8 months, I think, before I could like confidently break down how things work and like, what the dynamics are. But yeah, I mean, my background is in no way crypto. And even though I've been in this space now for 2 years, I believe in a lot of elements of it, like, the rails and, financial inclusion and things like that. But I sort of haven't tipped into the degen side or the speculative side. Like I'm heavily focused on the utility side of things.
I love it. And honestly, it's probably good timing because, it's so funny. I think people are at this point kind of figuring out like, well, I guess I'm just thinking out loud because I think right now at the start of 2026, it's such a unique time, I think, for crypto in general because we're seeing a lot of, there will always be speculation, but it feels like the narrative has shifted quite a bit towards institutional, towards real world use cases, towards tokenized assets. The degen stuff is kind of going away. The read write own stuff, and hot off the presses this week, right? Farcaster is basically getting acquired by Nanar, which is like one of the clients that's built on top of it. So I think the point here is like everything is coming back to what I have always believed is the ultimate use case for blockchain, which is crypto, but crypto in the situation of self-sovereignty of money and just money in general, right? And where it's coming from, which is quite interesting. So with all that being said, we'll love to kind of now bring it back to Rootstock, right? And what you're doing there, because I think pretty much anyone who, crypto or not, I think pretty much everyone knows what Bitcoin is, but I
Yeah.
don't know if everyone knows what Rootstock is and its role within the Bitcoin ecosystem. So could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, and Rootstock, it's a super fascinating story because it's tied into everything you just said, which is both Bitcoin, but also the extendability of financial services and also building a new paradigm, right? Where it's needed. So it was founded, Rootstock is probably the third or fourth chain in existence, which is really interesting, right? It's like, they always talk about it being, in the crypto world, they always talk about OGs, right? It's the original thinking around Rootstock was about, is almost 15 years old, right? So it's started by a bunch of Argentinian Bitcoiners who, obviously, Argentina was one of the patient zeros for Bitcoin because of all of the inflation and the currency instability and the possibilities and potential that Bitcoin had for reimagining their financial world, right? And so what Rootstock did was create the technology for programmable Bitcoin, so EVM compatibility on Bitcoin. Because if you think about Bitcoin, Bitcoin is safe and it's secure, but it's slow and you can't do anything with it besides store value, right? It's the chain is limited. So creating the EVM ability to build smart contracts on top of it extended Bitcoin's capabilities. So Rootstock has really always dedicated itself to making Bitcoin work for everybody. So taking the rails of Bitcoin, which is safety and security, and extending it into all sorts of use cases that could benefit from it, right? And so I think as I said, Rootstock has been around for a very long time. Initially, I would say for 5 or 6 years, the focus was on just nailing the technology, right? Because this type of work is incredibly complex and technologically demanding. So we built best in this is before my time, so I'll talk about them in the third person. They built like industry leading technology because they're the inventors of the technology, right? So how do you move Bitcoin, into what's called RBTC, so Rootstock Bitcoin, onto the Rootstock chain? How do you ensure all of the security, things like that, right? So then Afterwards, it was all about, okay, now that the technology is there, how do you build on ramps and off ramps into the rest of the crypto world, right? So that's kind of when I came in. So integrations with Layer Zero, with LeFi, all of the leading ramps, bridges, things like that. USDT Zero as a stablecoin to enable interoperability. And then this last year has been about really cultivating the full DeFi ecosystem, eventually in the service of institutional use cases. So what Rootstock is trying to do with making Bitcoin work for everybody is, because it's the longest running a Bitcoin sidechain, and because it's got the security it does, it's got the highest hash rate after Bitcoin, right? So it's almost 90%. So it's literally the next best thing to Bitcoin. It's all about saying, okay, well, now that Bitcoin has been established as the digital gold, and now that there are Bitcoin holders who have held it for 10, 15 years and are expecting more functionality beyond price goes up, right? What can be done, but also what can be done with the Bitcoin rails themselves to power use cases beyond crypto speculation. So Rootstock is addressing all of that, but with Bitcoin at the center.
And I think it would be super helpful to draw the parallel of like Rootstock versus Rootstock Labs, right? That you're the chief growth officer of Rootstock Labs. What is the goal of the labs?
Yeah, so Rootstock is the chain, right? And Blake mentioned a few times Riff. So just very quickly on the architecture, because of the fidelity to Bitcoin, the gas token on Rootstock is RBTC, right? So it's a wrapped Bitcoin, but as I mentioned, with the highest hash rate after Bitcoin. And then there's a utility token, Riff, which is primarily used as the governance token for the DAO, Rootstock Collective, but also it is used in the Rootstock ecosystem to help scale Bitcoin, right? So you could do more on the Rootstock chain. Rootstock Labs is a decentralized organization that exists to grow the Rootstock ecosystem, right? And so the Rootstock ecosystem could be protocols, it could be users, it could be use cases, right? So within Rootstock Labs, my primary focus with the team is, how do more people on the marketing side find out about Rootstock? How do they understand what the value proposition of Rootstock and Riff are? And then how do you draw both users and protocols to it so that the ecosystem is thriving?
Mm. And I'm curious, since you mentioned that when you joined, you really tried to learn as much as possible and like understand the depth of of Rootstock, its story and everything. As your sort of first order of business as a chief growth officer, where did you map out the areas of the opportunity? Because you mentioned that the first year or last year you focused on interoperability a lot,
Yeah.
and like really working with all these protocols. And I think coming into the space, let's say from Web 2, this is like a lot to kind of get your head around and enable this interoperability, because the space is so fractionalized. So I'm curious of like, what were your, what was your go-to market, let's say, first things that you did when you joined?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, and this is not a crypto specific, but as an executive, when you come in, I think there's a process where you first get a lay of the lands, where you try to understand, okay, what are the internal dynamics of the company? What are the external dynamics of how the company is operating? Is there product market fit? What's the competitor set? What's the competitive differentiator? And then you say, what are the 2 to 3 things that I can do that would have the most immediate impact? And then I'll worry about the other stuff over time as I kind of build up my knowledge base, right? And so the interoperability piece, to me, it was the most obvious point, which is, it doesn't matter how great your technology is or how great the value proposition is if no one can use it, because it's impossible to to get to you, right? And so that was like an obvious first step, which is, if you want to go to market, you got to go to where the markets are, right? So having layer zero, which gets you onto all the different chains, having all of these, aggregator, I won't use all the term, the jargon, but all of these different front end things that enable users to kind of price compare or find the best routes to get on and off. That's like that's a no-brainer, right? And so like while focusing on that, I was then able to kind of really start to pull together a more robust go-to-market strategy of okay, well, where do we think our proposition is going to resonate the most? Therefore, what do we do, right? Because I think because Rootstock had been so focused on the tech build side and also cultivating some of its key protocols that it launched earlier on, there was this real decision. Let's get to go to market like after we feel like we're at a level. So I focused just on where I could add the most impact quickly, and then bought myself time almost to sort of like plan out the more involved strategy.
Sorry, I was like pausing because I wasn't sure if Polina was going to follow up on that. But that makes a lot of sense. It's always this tricky thing within crypto, right? Where it's like we raise on an idea, but then we have to build the thing. But building these things on chain, it's not easy, number one, and it comes with a lot of risks, right? Because we've seen too many examples of when you rush it and then people get hacked and then the whole thing falls apart, right? So makes sense. But as you're kind of talking about, right, I think you guys are in a place where things are a bit further out now. The product is a bit further along. What I'm curious about is like, you guys have been around for quite a while. I feel like Bitcoin and that ecosystem evolved quite a bit, and even in just the past couple of years, right? But I'm curious, like if someone were to come up to you today and ask you, why is Rootstock, why should I use Rootstock as like my Bitcoin L2 versus every other? Like, how would you respond to that? Would it be a tech thing? Would it be, just more integrations? Is it faster? Is it cheaper? I don't know. Like, how would you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, look, it depends on what type of user you are, right? I mean,
Mm.
I think if you're being totally honest, like DeFi is more of an Ethereum thing, right? It's, because, Solana, it's cheaper, it's faster, whatever, right? So if you're within Bitcoin, you tend to already be quite ideological, right? Because you believe in Bitcoin, you believe in the ethos. So Rootstock is literally, I know I said it before, the next best thing to Bitcoin, right? It's the safest, it's the most secure, so it's proof of work, not proof of stake, right? It's architected to resemble Bitcoin. So if you think about, it's interesting. I mean, a broader answer to your question is one of the things that you always have to do in this space, because there's so much money sloshing around, and it's very easy for projects to start quickly and also show growth metrics that might not be real, right? There's this real tension between how much do you look around you and start to say, hey, are there things that I should be worried about, or are there things that we should be, imitating or keeping in mind, versus like, how do we just play our game, right? And like one of the things that I could tell you over the last 2 years is there's been so many competitors who had crazy TVL metrics or had crazy, and they've, once the TGE happened, or once they sort of ran out of a bit of funding or something, all of those numbers collapsed, right? And so I think that if you're asking why should you use Rootstock in the like kind of in the hypothetical, I mean, the answer is it's safer, it's more secure, it's slower than ETH and all the others, and it's more expensive, but that's what you get as a trade-off for for the other. I think that Rootstock by far has the most developed BTC-Fi ecosystem of staking, lending, trading, in various permutations. But again, I think Bitcoin doesn't trend toward very heavy retail usage, right? Because it's not designed to be low value, high transactions, et cetera. So I think that if you were like kind of like a retail speculator, I'd say, hey, I don't think Rootstock is for you because you're not going to want to pay the gas fees,
Mm.
and there's more opportunity somewhere else. But whereas I think that if you're a legit Bitcoin holder, I would say, this is this is the natural extension of Bitcoin, so come over.
Because just wanted to ask about it because from my sort of perspective or experience, I think the people who are like hooked on Bitcoin, they're super Bitcoin pilled and Bitcoin maxis. And like you said, um, your job was to basically think about both the retail, right, and the protocols side. So I was curious about like what are the biggest blockers on each one and like the promise to each one. And I think you mentioned already for retail users that it's like realistically the fees are higher, right, and it's lower, but if you are like in the Bitcoin ecosystem, this is the only solution that makes sense. So I'm curious, like from the perspective of the target audience as a retail trader, are you looking only at the current Bitcoin holders and maybe institutional, TradFi investors, or are you also kind of trying to Bitcoin peel other crypto holders?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, look, to your earlier point, I think one of the things that the Bitcoin ecosystem lacks relative to the broader ETH is just depths of liquidity, right? Like when you look at Aave, right? It's 99% like, ETH based, for example, right? And it's because that's where DeFi, that's where, that stuff sits. Like most if it, on a spectrum, the most maxi of Bitcoin maxis don't want to do anything with their Bitcoin. They're sitting on their Bitcoin deliberately and quite ideologically because the whole point is it's there you go, right? And so I think that if you put your marketing hat on, like it doesn't make sense to try to spend too much time convincing people that aren't necessarily in the community and aren't particularly convinced, right? So trying to get ETH people into Bitcoin when they're already very happy in ETH doesn't make sense. Trying to get super Bitcoin maxis to do stuff that they're not comfortable doesn't make sense. So you actually in some ways have to find maybe even outside the space, right? So people who are diversifying their treasuries, right, and are now going to do dip their toes in Bitcoin, but because they're used to kind of TradFi setups, they want some TradFi functionality that formerly wasn't. You almost want people coming in without the baggage of a lot of the sort of the accumulated history, right? So I think that with Rootstock, certainly from a marketing and from a growth perspective, I don't think it makes sense to try to convince people. I think it's much more about, like I always talk in the team about the three A's of like awareness, attractiveness, and accessibility, right? So I think that what we're just trying to do is we're trying to make sure that enough people hear about us, right? And then if they do hear about us, they can get onto the chain, they can get all of our core assets. And then once they get them, when they're on chain, there's some interesting things to do, right? And where
Yeah.
these people come from and what they do, that's sort of to a certain extent not, I'm less concerned about that because maybe these groups aren't even particularly rigid, right? But I think it's very difficult in the deeper crypto space to try to convince people to do something that they've never done before, you know?
Yeah. I love that you mentioned the framework, and it kind of, I mean, it all starts with awareness, right? And then you kind of push them down the funnel. And I think the primary question from here comes with, in a sense of, where do you get that awareness from when your sort of target investor is potentially even outside of crypto, right? Some marketers would think now with the, InfoFi dead and everything, it's like, do we go on TikTok? Do we go on LinkedIn? Like, what do we do? And
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful to know how are you approaching this, like in the Bitcoin space and sort of institutional maybe.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that what I always talk about with growth is, first of all, you have to understand your proposition, right? Because if you start audience first, I don't think you have clear why, what you're selling them, and why this resonates with that audience. If you start with the proposition, you then say, okay, well, who would want this proposition, right? And how do you get to them? So, for example, in the case of kind of non-retail, Twitter doesn't make sense, right? To your point about, TikTok, or, what, like, that is a younger audience. It's a more casual audience. Whereas if you're trying to transmit trust and legitimacy, it's got to be much more in person. It's got to be events based. It's got to be, personal relationships based, right? Whereas if you're doing, a more general market entry, I think you sort of have to do all of the above until you then work out where it resonates. So, one of the things I'm most proud of in the last year is actually working very closely with Myosin on market entry into Korea and Japan. And I knew that, to your point, Paulina, like, there is a big demand for Bitcoin in Asia, right? And there's a lot of Bitcoin holders in Asia. But first of all, Asia is not a monolith. Like, you can't even just talk about Asia, right? Like, China, Mandarin speaking isn't, audiences, aren't the same as Korean, aren't the same as Japan. So in both Korea and Japan, we followed, a Myosin go-to-market playbook, which was, you translate the technical documents because you need, devs to be able to see it. You do AMAs, Twitter, KOLs. You do everything, and then you sort of see what starts to resonate and who it's resonating with, and then you sharpen the message, right? So Korea is a much more retail-centric market. So we've tightened our growth focus on, okay, how do we get accessibility in Korea? And we just got listed in Corbit, one of the big centralized exchanges, towards the end of the year, because we hit for Korea Blockchain Week, and we met with the people, and we really put a lot of effort in there. Whereas Japan is far less retail centric and far more, institutional, right? And so we only worked that out by doing all sorts of tests, right? So you start off from, a hypothesis of what your proposition is, who do you think it'll kind of resonate with, and then I think you try multiple things, and then you start to look for signals, positive or negative, right? Like, what resonates, what doesn't, but you only sort of know that if you try a bunch of things, then you start to see what sticks,
I think this is such a great insight that you found success in those markets by trying and testing, because I'm of the opinion as well that, there are playbooks and, frameworks and whatever, but it's not all written in stone. It always all depends on the timing, what type of messaging you have, and everything. It all comes down to experimentation and iteration, and just a lot of work and thought that you put into it. And you're like a living, breathing example of that. So to follow up on that success, and congratulations on getting listed. Are you eyeing any new markets in 2026, or what are we sort of, what is Rootstock Labs focusing on this year?
I think 2026 for Rootstock is a consolidation of all of the, the work and the planning and the learnings of 2025, right? So all of our key metrics improved dramatically in 2025 because we were very intentional with what we wanted to do, with the ecosystem. So now it's all about, okay, we have a clear proposition, we have a clear user base, we have a clear product roadmap, for that user base. So let's really make the most of it. I think that we're not thinking new markets, because now that we're beginning to see traction in these new markets, it's like, why don't we make the most of that first, and then and then we can incorporate those learnings. But to your earlier point, like, I'm actually allergic to playbooks. I've worked over the course of my career with a lot of venture capital funds, and they love a playbook, right? Because I think it suggests that there's a repeatable model, and that, if you just follow certain steps, everything works out. And it's actually, I think, each company is different. The macro, the settings are different. So the more important thing is to just be objective led, but incredibly flexible as to, oh, okay, this isn't working. So for example, again, going back to the Myosin example, like with both markets, we were constantly tweaking what we were trying to do and the tactics we were doing based on what we were seeing, versus, no, let's keep doing this. Because again, to one of your earlier questions, you can't force people to engage with you the way you want them to engage with you. You actually have to more literally go to market and then see what you get from the market, and then say, oh, okay, right, okay, so this is what's resonating. Let's do more of that, right? Or, oh, okay, this doesn't seem to work. Why don't we change the messages and raise the salience of that instead? So yeah, I mean, I think 2026 is all about, just incorporating all of those learnings and just pushing, pushing in the places where we are. And also, a lot of the products that we have are global. So we're less concerned about market entry and more just about uptake.
Yeah. Like,
On that, yeah, I wanted to kind of get into institutional, right? As we talk about, adoption, as we talk about expansion this year, right? I think in our notes, I'm seeing like in October, right? You guys are pushing to unlock roughly the $260 billion in idle Bitcoin that sits in institutions. So I guess, could you tell us a bit more about what that is, how it's been going, and the opportunity you see? Because it makes sense, right? I think I saw a tweet today, which is like, if you look at global assets, top 10 assets, like Bitcoin is, I think, number 7 in terms of market cap. And so, and obviously, as like, I think the theme that we're seeing this year with crypto, and as we kind of alluded to at the beginning of this call, was institution is here, and frankly, for most of them, like Bitcoin is the first thing they'll deal with, right? And the first thing that they can understand. So yeah, would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, I mean, so we announced Rootstock Institutional in October at Digital Asset Summit. So what that comprises is working with both, ends customers. So whether that's, digital asset treasuries, whether it's high net worth individuals, funds, et cetera, and also intermediaries that, have them on the books, to first understand what are they looking to do with their Bitcoin, right? Because, I saw you put your hand up, Blake, when it was like, I'm just sitting on my Bitcoin, right? So there's a security and safety thing of, why should I move something that, that's stable and worth X, well, and then it's, okay, well, what can you do for it in a meaningful way that's sustainable, right? Because if you think about it, one of the big differentiating factors between, the degens and the hardcore crypto community versus the crypto curious or the kind of new entrants is, I would say, more than anything else, like risk appetite, right? Like, do you trust this totally decentralized dApp to do, X, Y, and Z if they promise these kinds of gains, or does it seem too good to be true, and you need to sort of get to know them, all that, right? So I think that a lot of what we're doing is trust building and ideation, and over the course of the year, you'll see a series of products launched, right? But if you think about it with Bitcoin, like, what would you want to do? You would want your Bitcoin to work for you in one way or another. And what that means, there's various permutations, but it's definitely watch the space. But I think, to your earlier question, Paulina, like, we're doing the same kind of approach, which is, instead of saying, hey, here's the one thing that we're going to do, everybody's going to love it, it's understanding in this space, okay, well, because it's a really good soundbite. I think it's like 92 or 93% of Bitcoin is not deployed in anything, right? It's just, but there's reasons behind that, right? Not only safety and security, but it's also there haven't been solutions that have been compelling enough to people to have them make those trade-offs, right? So we've been spending just an extensive amount of time almost on a listening tour and kind of like an ideation mode. And then, yeah, you could expect probably the next 6 to 9 months, for a rollout of some things. But I think interestingly, and, because obviously we're talking about marketing, I don't think you can expect us to make a lot of noise about it, because if you think about the crypto world, it's a very noise driven world, right? Like, hey, look at us, because what you're trying to do is fake it till you make it, and you're trying to create the perception of scale, you're trying to create the perception of success. Whereas like the quieter you are and the more out of the spotlight you are, just building, that's how you build sustainable stuff, right? So we have plans, but they're not going to be sort of, blasted on an AMA or something like
So
that.
mysterious. We can't, but
But
trying
yeah,
to
I
trying to
think
pull it
it's a
up.
common thread, to be honest. Like whenever it comes to institutional growth or something, it's always quiet and sort of happens in the background, and then you just see, news articles. Then you just see Cointelegraph tweet about it or something. Um, and I feel like it always happens behind closed doors. And something that you mentioned earlier is whenever your main thing is to evoke that trust and bring in those individuals and like sort of you know pill them, like Bitcoin pill them, it always happens through like events and personal connections and things like that. So this is not the sort of thing that you can actually um, make hype driven or viral. And I think the only way that you could potentially attract more of this to yourself is like through individual thought leadership and like what we call founder-led content, right? That's the only way that I kind of see that growing when it comes to just typical sort of marketing channels. Would that be
100%.
fair to say?
Although, again, like one of the things that, particularly with my advisor, I've always said to people is like, a lot of the time people, when they're launching a product, they don't sit and think, like, ultimately you're asking people to either give you their money or spend money, which I guess is the same thing, right? And, with marketing, they need to probably see and hear you six, 8, 10 times before they feel confident kind of taking the next step, right? So I think to your point, if you're trying to build a legitimate brand where the objective isn't, a TGE that pumps and dumps and, all the founders disappear, afterwards or something, but you're kind of, trying to build something for the long term, it's all of the brand marketing serves to reinforce confidence and, faith, in the business. But you shouldn't be trying to kind of push your achievements or kind of push the value prop, because I think then it just becomes a bit too salesy, right? Like you have to you have to be thinking about, well, what's the most effective persuasion technique, right? And it isn't talking about yourself, right? It's actually the opposite, which is understanding the needs and then trying to tailor solutions for those needs.
And then show don't tell, right? Yeah, I hear where you're coming from. It's like coming from a place of confidence, not coming off too pick me, desperate, I guess, especially with institutionals. I feel like, yeah.
Yeah, well, also because crypto is quite an interesting space because so many of the metrics are public, right?
Yeah.
Like if you think of look, all startups are fake it till you make it, right? But
Hmm.
it's not like most startups are are on these dashboards that show all of their revenues and their daily orders and stuff, right? And so there's an incentivization to game it, or there's an incentivization to have very kind of hacky shortcuts to kind of get big quickly, with the idea being then, being big attract. But I think there's no easy in the financial space. There's no easy way, to do it. It's got to be slow and steady, and it's got to be, very careful, very thoughtful, and very, um, you have to be aware of all of the parameters and just making sure that, you're not, you're not doing anything that could backfire on you later on.
I feel you. I feel you. I want to kind of, I do want to flag, we're starting to come up towards the end here, but I always like to kind of, we dove quite deep, I think, on the specifics, but would love to kind of zoom out a little bit and kind of get your hot take on, I don't know, like the general state of the industry. Also, like, what are the most exciting developments in Bitcoin? I think, people, like Davos is happening right now, right? And
Yeah.
some of the like CZ, Brian Armstrong, a couple people are out there talking to, leaders of central banks, right? And I don't know. It's a bit of a, in my opinion, a bit of a hackneyed counter argument or argument against Bitcoin. But people are like, well, what about quantum? We've all seen that meme
Mm.
on Twitter at some point, right? But yeah, I guess like, and as an American, at least I would say like, Clarity Act, and we'll see. I think it just got delayed a little bit, but I'm sure it'll happen at some point. But so all these things, regulatory, tech developments, the market evolving, like, what is most exciting to you about Bitcoin, and what's your view on the state of the industry and the role that Rootstock's going to play in it in this coming year?
Yeah, I'll sort of answer that slightly out of sequence, which is like the broader industry. I think because each project is approaching things, totally different. So I sort of actually don't think about other people beyond, oh, are there collaboration opportunities, right? Because I think because of the architecture, because of the value prop, everybody has to do things, their own way. But I think what I am most excited about, in part because of my I guess my own background, is the convergence of TradFi and DeFi. And like, I remember when I first went to events in 2024, it was almost like being in a sci-fi convention, right? Like, it was like language I didn't understand, like, when people started taking pictures with me on Telegram, I was like, like, what is this, like, I felt very out of place. And I was also like, I don't quite get what's like what these projects are doing, what's going on, right? Whereas now, like at Token in Singapore, last year, and some, Korea Blockchain Week, whatever, it feels much more familiar because you're having conversations about stablecoin backed, money flow, right? Bitcoin backed stake, Bitcoin, like, there are crypto as an enabler, blockchain. What's better? It's blockchain with, crypto token as enablers for financial services, right? So you're seeing the technology, which is kind of my prediction to a certain extent of where AI is going to go, right? Like, to your point about quantum and stuff, everybody is, oh, AI is going to be doing all our jobs, right? AI is going to be doing this. AI. Whereas, like, what will probably, I think will probably happen will be AI will be embedded into our kind of like daily tech stacks, right? Like, you look at Claude coding and stuff, but it doesn't replace what we're doing or become the new paradigm. It just becomes the mechanism to do it faster or cheaper, right? And so seeing the maturation and the embedding of blockchain technology into financial services just means that there's like it's no longer niche, so it's bringing in lots of different audiences who want to do lots of interesting projects. So, like, in terms of where Rootstock fits, like, as I said earlier on, I mean, Rootstock's been around for a while, and one of the critical things about Rootstock versus other projects is it was always mission led, right? It was trying to create the opportunity using the Bitcoin rails for real life use cases, real life, financial services, improving people's lives. And so now that the world has caught up to Rootstock is in a position to be able to offer those solutions. So I think, yeah, Rootstock is perfectly positioned in where the industry's gone.
So 2026 is the year of Rootstock.
Yeah, in 2027, 2028, lots of rootstock use.
Yeah. I mean, the track record proves it, right? It's not just something
Yeah.
that's been around in the
No,
past
it's
few years.
and like it is interesting where the CEO of Rootstock is the founder, right? So
Mhm.
and he's always had the vision of what Bitcoin can do. And so much of what he says is, people are finally where I was 15 years, right? And it must be just such a crazy feeling to be like, oh, I called this. And maybe it took a bit longer than I thought, but yeah, here we are, right?
Here we are. It's happening. The mainstream moment is upon us, and I think you guys are really well positioned for it. So it's very exciting stuff.
Yeah.
As we go towards, we're about to go to rapid fire questions, but I guess the last thing I'd love to kind of wrap up this part of the conversation with, Ben, would be getting, I guess, just letting the folks know, like, as far as you can disclose, because it sounds like we kind of have to keep it tight to the chest here, or close to the chest. But in the coming year, we talked about institutions, we talked about institutional like adoption, all these things. Like, is there anything that I guess within whether it's the Rootstock community or potential Bitcoin or current Bitcoin holders who would be interested in participating, etc. Like, let the folks know, like, I guess giving them a sneak peek in any way of like, should they be expecting anything coming soon, or basically, I'm
Yeah,
I'm
well,
hunting for
well, look,
alpha here. Yeah.
100%. I think in the next 3 to 6 months, if you follow Rootstock Institutional, right?
Hmm.
If you are a Bitcoin holder,
Hmm.
yeah, of some significant degree, right?
Hmm.
I think Rootstock over time will be, and I don't say this kind of like where I'm holding all of this back, and then all of a sudden there's going to be one big announcement. It's more that I don't think until we have everything fully bottomed out, it makes sense to say,
Hmm.
oh, what about this? What about, like, I'm not trying to, again, I'm not trying to forward sell anything, right? But what I
Yeah.
can promise is if you have Bitcoin and you want to deploy that Bitcoin in different ways
Hmm.
to make it work for you, whether
Mm.
that's, you know, sources of liquidity or, I think that we will be able to help, but solution TBD, no promises,
Yeah.
I'm putting as big a disclaimer as I can as possible.
As you
But I
should.
think that if you are
Yeah.
a Bitcoin holder and you are interested in doing more with your Bitcoin,
Mm.
but in a non-degen style way, in a safe and secure
Yep.
way, Rootstock is your preferred option. And just watch this space.
I like it. I will say, like, full transparency, like, I don't remember if we've talked about this in the previous episode, but I do hold enough that I think I should be. It just sits there in two different wallets, and I'm like, I should do something with it. I should earn some yield. But I think the issue for me as a holder has always been it's a little intimidating, I think, to like bridge, and it's just like, um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I'm like, it just sits there, which is fine. I'm never gonna sell it. I'll never spend it. But it's like, shouldn't it be generating some yield for me? So, yeah, I
No,
might
I
have to
think
look
there's
into this.
that.
Yeah,
And it's like, where does the yield come from? Right?
yeah.
Because, like, look,
Hmm.
one of the things that you see in the crypto world, and I've always said this, because
Yeah.
one of the advantages to being a crypto outsider is, like, as a non kind of what you would call true believer or something, you question everything when you come in. You're like, what? This is, and it's like, wait a minute, if all of a sudden your TBL spikes to X, or if all of a sudden, incentives are 60% or something,
Yeah.
that can't, like,
Something's
there are
off.
something's off, right? There are general rules of, like, economic principles that, like,
Yeah.
this is, and so I think it's very sensible to question everything and be like, okay, I want to do some. How are you going to generate yield on
Yeah.
the Bitcoin, right? Like, with which mechanism? How is it going to sit on your chain and, off the bit, and how are you going to guarantee safety? Like, you have to go through all, you as a Bitcoin holder have to kick the tires and interrogate that very fully. So, you going back and asking the rootstock value proposition, we're kicking the tires, and, like,
Mm.
we're not just saying, with any of our solutions, hey, trust us,
Yeah.
right? Like, don't worry about where it comes from.
Yeah.
Don't just trust us. It's
You guys are
we
full trustlessness maxis, if you will, which is
exactly. You
ridiculous.
know, ironically, in the space we're in, we're trustful, not, you know, not trustless.
Yeah,
So
that's true. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I think it's because people lost sight of that original ethos, right? Like Bitcoin, Bitcoiners were the OG, like proper trustlessness. But I think in this like casino that people got caught up in, where we get greedy, and I'm a part of that. I was a big Terra Luna guy at one point. That was probably my biggest loss, I think, on any rug of any kind. And I think back on it, I'm like, well, listen, it was all there. We just bought into our own bullshit, frankly. We're like, yeah, seniors, yeah, it's fine. Like, like,
yeah, yeah. And
that's
look,
how it
I
goes.
think that when you're in the world and you're
Yeah.
with other people from that world, it's that's one of the most interesting things about also the institutional side of things, because, for example, I should have mentioned, so I speak Japanese and I studied abroad in Japan. So part of
Mm,
me going to Japan to do stuff is because I'm able to actually kind of run these meetings and talking to non crypto savvy people. You really have to explain the principles in
mm,
quite clear, easy to understand stuff, and you kind of realize how crazy so much of the surrounding world is when you're trying to talk to outsiders about it. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And I think that when it's all insiders, it's very easy to kind of convince yourself that things are only going to go up, and
Yeah.
whatever. So it's very good having that kind of dissenting voice in your head.
Yeah. It's good. That's what we need. We need more of it.
Yeah.
Um. Oh, sorry, Polina. Anything else? One last thing.
No, I just wanted to maybe
Oh,
start with rapid fire.
okay. Yeah, let's kick it off. But this has been really good. So yeah, Polina, kick it off.
Okay, the first one is, what is the most underrated marketing tactic in Web3?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So I actually think it's long-term proposition build, right? Because everybody
Mm,
is chasing the short-term gains, right? So it's like very loud marketing, it's very unsustainable campaigns, it's gigantic side events at conferences and stuff, right? But the more underrated marketing in Web3 is staying quiet, focusing on build, and also, sorry, I should add, cultivating the right relationships, right?
mm,
Because you know you you meet a lot of people in this space, right? Because it is a fairly sort of closed off space, right? So
yeah.
you meet all of the DApp people, the protocol people, the investors, whatever, and it's like being able to sift through who can I collaborate with over the long term where we can grow together, right? Or who is best placed to help me, help us with this, versus that, right? And because one thing about marketing is the best marketing is word of mouth and advocacy, right? Because it's free and it probably has the best conversion, right? Because you trust
Mm.
other people that in your circle, right? So to me, the most underrated marketing is long-term builds in an industry that doesn't reward that immediately.
Word of mouth,
Word
trust,
of mouth.
value props. I love that. That's actually, I think that's probably the first one we've heard that one, which I like. We've had
I
many
think so.
variations.
Yeah.
Um, most overrated marketing tactic going the other way. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean it's the inverse of what I just said, right? So I
yeah,
think that the most overrated thing is, like, if you think about it, right? When I when I first started going to my first big conference was, I think, ETHCC in Brussels, right? So this would have been about,
hmm,
almost 2 years ago. And at the time, everybody was talking about airdrops, right? Like
yeah,
airdrops, 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 right?
yeah,
And obviously, that flopped over time, right?
yeah,
Then there were things like renting TVL, right? From all of
yeah,
these people that would put their TVL in multiple protocols, at the same time,
yeah,
right? I think that, you know, yes, you could give away free money. Yes, you could do, but if you look at where the protocols that have really both thrived and grown over the last 3 to 4 years, they didn't take shortcuts, and it wasn't giving away things for free, or it wasn't short-term marketing. It was very much about the underlying value proposition, right? So
Yeah.
I think that very hacky, tactics to get to like a kind of a quick fire, KPI are like super overrated.
Yeah. Very much total slow and steady wins the race, I guess is the thinking. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, for sure. The next one is on our list is which crypto brand or project you think is doing well right now. That's not Rootstock.
Yeah. So what's really interesting, I don't know if people have come onto your podcast to talk about it, but one of the things that is happening, because a lot of the questions you guys have been asking have been about institutional. There's this real cohort of institutional focused dApps that are like very serious, run by like really great people, and have had the accompanying growth. So and they all work with each other, right? So Midas, which is real world assets, Hyperrhythm, which is a dApp but has all sorts
Hmm.
of other things, Morpho and Wheeler as
Yeah.
lending protocols, right? Like Steakhouse Finance, Iraq is like there is this cohort of protocols that understand what institutions will need in order to go on chain, and they're servicing. So if you look at it, Morpho is killing it, Midas is killing it, Wheeler is killing it, and knowing those guys, they're great.
They're all up there. A lot happening, and I think yeah, I would double click on Morpho. I think because I think what they've been doing in terms of like bringing kind of institutional capital to the masses is pretty game changing. So again,
100%. And
yeah,
and there's both network effects, but there's also just virality, like, the more people that see it, the more people that come in, and they're really serious. It's like a really serious operation.
exactly. Okay, last one, but this one's a fun one. I tell everyone this, but I love to kind of wrap it up this way. Is we've done like 3 years of this in various forms. This is like our third season. We've asked every guest some version of this question, but it's always kind of stayed the same, which is really just looking back at the past 12 months. I would say, like, what's your biggest professional learning?
Within Web3 or in general?
It doesn't have to be a crypto thing necessarily. I think it's just a nice moment of like reflection on your career and I think sometimes we get so caught up in the day-to-day craziness of work. So sometimes you got to zoom out and you guys say like all the stuff that's been happening, especially working in crypto, right? Things are so chaotic. Like if you look back on all that and you had a reflection or a learning, um, as I guess in your case, chief growth officer, like what do you feel like you've
Yeah.
learned? Yeah.
So I think that it's been a reminder that a very tight focus on your goal, right, and running
Hmm.
your race versus looking at the other, looking around. You gain momentum and velocity over time because you get more clarity and you get more signals that what you're
Hmm.
doing is working, right? So if you think like one of the things that really strikes me in the Web3 space is how much how many things are flavor of the month. So whether it be
Hmm.
tokens, different kinds of like functionality. Like when I entered the space, people were still talking about what are they called, ordinals, or there was something else,
Yeah.
right? It was
Yeah, I
like
remember
Bitcoin
Ordinals. Yeah.
fees. Yeah, yeah. The fact that, oh yeah, I remember that. Do you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
mean, there was always like a flavor of the month, and there was, and everybody would get really excited, and like if you're able to cut out the noise to what you were just saying and just focus on what am I personally, as an executive trying to achieve for the company, but what's the company trying to achieve? You can block out a lot of the macro stuff. You obviously have to be aware of it, but I would say, for example, Rootstock has really thrived in the last 12 months, even though yes, Bitcoin price has gone up, but the broader macro conditions have worsened quite a bit, right? Like, altcoins are down, the retail market has stalled out, right? Because of all these, these shocks and stuff. But we personally at Rootstock haven't felt it because we haven't been trying to chase multiple things at the same time. We've just been trying to win our race and play our game, right? And so
Yeah.
I think just having relentless focus and clarity on what you're
Mm.
trying to achieve
Yeah.
and blocking out external noise,
Every
it
new flavor of the month,
enables,
every 2 weeks.
yeah,
Yeah.
it enables you to be very intentional with what you want the team to be doing,
Yeah.
and also understanding your own performance as a company.
Mm. I love it. I think it's great. I feel like throughout this whole conversation, there's been a very clear through line of just kind of, you know, and I think it speaks to what you've been doing. I think it speaks to what Rootstock has been doing, which is like just staying focused, heads down building, getting shit done. And I think it seems to be paying off at this moment, especially in this past, end of last year. And now I'm sure what's coming up this year with, Bitcoin is, I got to say, like, ETH was my entry point. By the end of the day, I do think there's a lot of people who, over time, all roads end up leading back to Bitcoin at some point or another. Because, you know, ETH's volatility, and so does Bitcoin, but Bitcoin's a little less volatile than ETH. So I'm like, I want to store some value there. And all else to say is like, I think,
Yeah.
oh, sorry, no,
No, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
No, no, please.
No, I was just gonna say, I think what you guys have done really well is just staying focused and staying true to the ethos of I think what Rootstock was focused on, and from a marketing point of view as well, and also like appreciate that you gave us and worked with us to kind of give that permission to experiment and try and figure out these value props as we enter new markets. So it's all good stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because I think, look, I think the broader thing, because Paulina's asked a lot of questions about kind of like Web3 in general. It's like there aren't that many established product market fit business models, right? As in, ETH's business model is they built a community, and there are enough ETH holders, who are interested in it, right? That they then sustain the ecosystem, but that's not necessarily a business model as such, right? So if you're, I mean, obviously ETH is super successful, but I think that because there aren't blueprints to say, oh, okay, yeah, we're gonna do it like these guys, but maybe slightly different here or there. It's like you have to have an open mind, and you have to work from what you have, but also where you see the market maturing,
yeah,
right? Like so, yeah. I mean, that's what has been so great about the working with Myosin on these market entries, because you could start with a hypothesis, but the hypothesis can easily be disproven, and you have to not be precious about it and say, oh, no, no,
yeah,
no, it's like it's the people that are wrong, I'm right. You have to say, okay, well, if the Korea, if the Korean market isn't particularly institutional
yeah,
because regulation is so tight, but everything flows from speculation on the token, in which case you need to be on a centralized exchange, right?
yeah,
That's that's a go-to-market, to your early playbook. Get onto a
right,
centralized exchange.
yeah,
But like you wouldn't know that until you tried a few things and you saw what resonated, right? So you got to keep an open mind, and you got to just be hyper. You got to be tracking everything, and then be hyper responsive, and then say, okay, cool. Like, well, I forgot what the expression is. Like, strongly held opinions. Sorry,
Simon and I use this one all the time. Strong opinions loosely held.
loosely
Yeah,
held, right? As in,
that's
like, you
our
always have
film
to
on
be
it.
willing to kind of pivot, right? So
That's
yeah, no,
how him
and
and
it's
I
worked
talk
for
every
us,
day.
and hopefully it'll continue to.
Fingers crossed. But I'm bullish. I've seen the behind the scenes. You guys are doing great stuff, and excited for what's coming up next. So we'll make it
Amazing.
happen. All right, we are running a little bit over. But thanks so much for like staying a little bit late. But I guess as we wrap things up, Ben, any final call outs for anyone listening, either on the live stream or the pod when we publish it next week? Um, where should people go? What should people do? And then we'll wrap from there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, if any of this sounded interesting, Rootstock, you can follow Rootstock Labs and Rootstock Chain on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on there's Discords, there's Telegrams, like whatever your preferred engagement method is. But yeah, I mean, if there's one takeaway for the listeners here, it's Bitcoin is now here to stay. Rootstock is making Bitcoin work for everyone, and it's been 10 years, and it's been a great 10-year journey, and the next 10 years are going to be even better.
Boom.
Love it.
Bullish. Buy
Bullish.
Bitcoin. HODL.
Exactly.
Use Rootstock.
Buy Bitcoin, get onto Rootstock.
Exactly. All right. And with that, Ben, thanks so much for coming on. This is a really fun conversation. Always love to talk about, Bitcoin and what's coming up there and what you guys are doing, and excited for the rest of the year. So thanks so much for coming on. Have a great rest of your day and rest of the week, and we'll see you online. Thanks so much.
Amazing. Thanks so much, guys.
See you online.
All right. Talk
Bye.
soon.